Tarquin Rainbow O'Sullivan.
Oh, okay.
And I'm Dylan Skyhuck. Can
Sky
tell
what?
Dylan Skyhuck. You can tell. You
Okay.
can tell. You can tell where. You can tell where my parents are coming from. Okay, just
Go ahead.
if you're good. Just a nice. Would you mind just stating your name and how you might choose to describe yourself as like an artist and a poet and.
Oh, okay. Bob Parks, and I wouldn't describe myself. I think basically Malevich announced the end of easel painting in 1917 with his black square. So anyone who calls herself an artist after that period is fine, but they're not union. I mean, it's just a conceit basically, a bit pompous.
Yeah.
So we're human beings basically, and that's how. I mean, all the art. Well, it's about 100 years, I suppose, in front of other things, but it tends to be, in front of what's going on. So, I mean, everything's got to drop their labels, basically, but art already has, officially, 100 years ago. But no one seems to know. So, but I do call myself a performance artist, and because that's what I've done, really, since 1964. I was doing it before Maria Abramovich, and before Gilbert and George, and before Laurie Anderson. So I predated all of those people.
The original artist.
In England, not in America. Capro was doing it in America, and then the Actionists in Vienna, and the Japanese Yoko Ono.
Yeah.
We reckon the first performance artist to it was Johannes Bader. Who was that's with talking to Gustav Metzger. He brought over the Actionists in 1968 to the Africa Centre. He brought Yoko Ono over as well. So he was quite similar. Anyhow, we agreed that Bader was probably the first. He was, ridiculed, kind of like Captain Beefheart was by Frank Zappa. I don't know. He sort of made into some sort of, fool. Sort of figure, and but he did the first sort of assemblages of just things, just make a pile of them kind of thing. So that was his. He was a monumental architect, and he had this design of 1,000-foot aircraft hangar that Zeppelins would circumnavigate the world, spreading peace, and that was one of his. And then the other one was Baroness Elsa, who was a sort of female equivalent. I've dug all these things out. She was walking down Broadway in 1904 with tin cans on her breast and continually getting arrested for nudity.
Oh, how brilliant!
Yeah. So this is, it's got a history that goes back quite a way. I mean, probably before then, but they were in the West probably the first. Doing it, yeah.
Oh, I love that answer. What would you say? Living in an alternative fashion, how would you say that kind of has an impact on your relationship to creation itself? Would you say you kind of embody your art, and the two both the existence and self and creation all kind of become kind of one in a sense?
I wouldn't describe it as being an alternative relationship. I think it's quite a traditional one, which is. No, it's my whole life. I don't have any children. I'm not married, so I've basically given my whole life to art. But being working class, I had to work 9 to 5 just to supplement, to live, sort of thing. So, is that an answer?
Yeah, that's brilliant. Yeah, I'm really quite happy with whatever.
Yeah.
It's you that's the interesting, and me just trying to ask questions.
Ask me anything you like. You can get as personal as you like. I don't care. There are no limits.
I'm going to leave out that question because it's a bit boring.
Sure.
What would you say? What would you say is there a philosophy that you would live by?
Philosophers, Heidegger
as a person, possibly. Like, what would be something that you kind of take into your experience that kind of
kindness, something like that, being kind, and there are philosophers I can quote. With Heidegger and Dasein, he said that you get this unfolding of what your life's all been all about. When you die, it's a bit late, so he identified the uncanny, and that was the realm of what he called the artist. So that's really that's our area, so to speak, that has been determined by him. And the other one's Merleau-Ponty, who one that's American Scott. I don't know what he is really. Robert Irwin, who I like, and he. In the 40s, he was working on it's the Finnish fetish. It's the light and sound, light and space. I think that was the movement, and he would work with horse racing, betting on horse racing, and jobs on sort of cleaning the inside of the engines and all that. And then in the 50s, he went to Greece, to Greek islands, to read the page of Merleau-Ponty every 3 or 4 days, and then back in his Venice studio, he had a dot on the wall, and it moved a little bit. And after 10 years, he went round getting sort of vacuum-formed shapes, and then he became aware of the cracks in the walls, and he put some scrim in Chicago in a museum, and also the Perception Station, one of the first installations. And then he went out without any preconceived ideas. So there's like a freeway, and he sort of made it go up like that hadn't been finished, and he had a walkway between student accommodations, the paths that they walked, and then he put these great sheets of metal to alter the perception of the space. But he'd go down to 1,000th of an inch or something, whereas Anish Kapoor is kind of a poor man's Robert Owen. But Larry Bell, who was also in that movement, I read in the catalogue in Albuquerque to one of his shows at the end, the art glossary or whatever. He said the East Coast artists like Jasper Johns Rauschenberg asked the metaphysical question, why? What's the meaning of life? The big Karen that is. Whereas the West Coast artists asked the metaphysical question, how? So how do you do it? I.e. special effects, Hollywood, the whole thing. So how do you pull it off so it really works? Not you say it works and then people have to buy into it. Something that actually does in a phenomenological way, really. So, now, LA, the dynamics of that, where I lived for 10 years, 72 to 82, I developed, I see if I can remember, it's a trichotomy. It's the Ferris Gallery group, Billy Al Bengston and all those people, had a phenomenological approach to perception. Now that was underpinned, in my opinion, there was like the Ferris Gallery, the black and the Chicano elements, and the black one underpins. So they had a process approach to spirituality. How that plays out is because I talked to Billy Al Bengston, and I said, like rhythm and blues. That was so I suppose my main thing has been rhythm and blues. That's been my sort of like what it's been, the rhythm and blues feelings. And I'm just actually now changing into psychedelia, because that's my period. That was, my ex-wife took part in the first Love in Griffith Park in '67, I think it was Summer of Love. Anyhow, I can't remember. What was that? Oh, I forgot what I was saying. Oh yeah. No, sorry. Carry on.
Just the philosophy behind your
Oh, philosophy behind it. That and I think I was at an art school and we did an adaptation of the Epic of Gilgamesh for the Arts Week. We had blues musicians coming down. Now, G.S. Fraser, who ran the Modern English American Literature course at Leicester University, invited me onto his seminar group, the MA seminar group. And earlier, I think my mum and dad had come down, and they were saying bed and breakfast, and I told the people that I support the Hungarian Russian invasion of Hungary, and they really had an unpleasant, because they were Hungarian. So it turns out that the people who owned the bed and breakfast thing, so that was an unfortunate case. Anyhow, what George then described me as one of the last romantic Stalinists, and I've kept that identity ever since, really. And, I don't quite know what it means, but I think probably it's played out in life, but in what's the word? In line. But aesthetically, I think there's still a certain amount of mileage there. Looking at those ideas. I mean, there was in Paris. There's a Russian guy who had bought a block, 2 or 3 blocks on the outskirts of Moscow, and recreated a Stalinist commune where he didn't allow people to go in or out for 2 or 3 years, or maybe 10. I don't know how long. And I think it's 12 feature-length films he did.
Wow.
And they're incredible. I mean, you think of communism, it's quite the opposite. There's pornography, that you name it. It's absolutely, wonderful. Now it got to Paris, so I went across to Paris to see it. It was coming to London, but I'm not sure it didn't make it to London. I don't know why, because it was a terrific thing. They had, it presented what this ideology. Where it comes from is London was the conception of communism and also the birthplace of communism. Marx was at the British Museum, and he wrote a really good reply, which is philosophy. Proudhon, the anarchist, I'd read this in Predip, who said the philosophy of poverty, and Marx's reply was the poverty of philosophy, which is, I've never read anything quite as vitriolic as it absolutely goes straight into him and just merciless. I mean, it's a fantastic read. So then Lenin, Stalin, Trotsky, Rosa Luxemburg and a few others were in London in 1908, I think, and they voted in a pub, voted in Bolshevism. So the two aspects of communism were given birth in London. So that was
the hidden history of communism. Yeah.
Oh, I know. Incredible. Now, what Marx taught was that you need a proletarian society in which it can only stand a chance in those. And both the countries that it's been tried are both agrarian economies, with China, Russia and China. So, with the whole world against it, it didn't stand a chance. And really, they were hoping in 1917 for England and Germany to join on in, but they backed out. So it didn't stand a chance, but it was a valiant effort. And,
Lenin had a really brilliant. Lenin was a kind of a beautiful person in a lot of ways. And his perspective on
what he did
on
was
society and how to,
Well, it's called revisionism because it, for these reasons outlined. So he implemented the 5-year and 10-year plans and all that sort of thing. And later, Stalin. Now, with an agrarian economy, it's too far distributed. Hasn't got a chance. And on top of that, the kulaks, who were this kind of rich peasants, were so conservative you wouldn't. So he killed them all off. You see. Now at that time, it wasn't such a big issue because that was happening all over the world. But it's a thing that's been pinpointed. Yeah. But
I've always quite liked Epicureanism. Apparently, it was quite a big. It was a big part of kind of Marxist philosophical basis, and it's ancient Greek philosophy of the study of happiness. And the Epicurean society was kind of about creating a small group of you and your friends, whether it be 7 or 8 people, who all endeavour to do the things that make them happy in life, whether it be painting or art or music or science or maths or philosophy, as it were. And the Epicurean societies were so popular that they kind of spread all across the Mediterranean coast for over 1,000 years.
Really?
Until the Christian soldiers came in and destroyed them all and turned everyone into monasteries. Yeah. Because they respected the communities to that level that they.
Well, that's our generation. We're moral relativists. Yeah. And also. What is it? I can't. There's a word for it. I can't remember what it is. But what you said, so Epicurean. There's a word. There's a word anyhow for being happy, staying happy kind of thing, which is really much the American stance.
There's a new kind of idea that I'm looking into a little bit as part of my project called neo-Luddism. Which is like I'm sure you've heard of the Luddites.
The Luddites.
Yeah. It's this idea of certain technological rejections because we kind of gung ho. Heading straight towards the abyss of technological adoption to the point at which we kind of become in ourselves irrelevant. We're no longer autonomous within the structures we create. We're just
Oh no, absolutely.
There's a good quote that said we're going to become the sex organs of the machines. I can't remember who said it, but So
Well, if you think of the 20th century, the dominant philosophical, or whatever you call it, was desublimation. That was the driving force of, i.e., you free up the libido and sexually, and that's the rise of popular culture. That's how Tracy Emin and all those were able to come in through that. And it's not 100 miles from what you were saying there.
Yeah, well, it all kind of ties in together, doesn't it? I love the idea of entanglement, where philosophy can tie into the arts, and the arts can, Yeah,
I agree with you about technology, though, and it's all right if you keep it at arm's length, sort of thing. It's, I mean, people in their mobile phones. Apparently, I went in Australia. I went to some lectures, and 3% of our DNA and RNA has been taken out of our cells through having mobile phones too close to us.
Really?
Apparently,
it's all a difficult one, and this is kind of the intention really with my specific kind of project is looking into this kind of conscious technological adoption, as opposed to just pushing our way straight through into a different realm.
Well, you know what Malevich's Black Square was all about, because I've read all his writing. Well, I've got his selected writing, and not selected all of it. So apparently, it was that he said it wasn't about the end of easel painting. What it was just stop. Even if it's 5 seconds, just stop and consider where we're at right now, which is exactly what we need to do.
An awareness of it,
not all this rushing ahead, almost like that. Despite it, just stop and as you say, the philosophical implications of it. Now I've got this. This is part of the philosophy as well. So I've up to now, I don't know. Anyhow, a Uruguayan director, Pablo Behrens, and he had a movie. Adrift in Soho, and then about a year later this film Last Night in Soho came out. It was at the London, very good film. I talked, because I'm in the Writers Guild of Great Britain, I was talking with the director and asked him anyhow I asked him various but it turned out I like Graham Bond organisation, and it was pretty crappy music, sort of Cilla Black and all that kind of thing. But this one, Wade in the Water, live at Klutz Cleat. Now, he was an anarchist, Graham Bond. He had Ginger Baker and Jack Bruce and Dick Haxel Smith, and he committed suicide. Actually, he jumped in front of a train in the late 60s. I never got to see him. But he plays sax and hammered organ one hand. He's got a great voice as well. So the Graham Bond organisation. And when I was in Southall, where I was born, at school we formed the Southall Anarchists. I said, well, you can't form an anarchist, it's a contradiction in terms, but we did it anyhow. And one of the guys taught me all Graham Bond's piano improvisation, so that was good to pick up that. But I'll tell you about the movie first, and then a project that I'm doing now. In my show, the Gallery of Everything, the one person, because I was doing a series of performances, and there was someone who was actually listening, Adam Daly, and he's written a trilogy, and he's a philosopher outside a writer, he calls himself. And this character, No Name Now, Bigger Than God. So I've had that as a challenge for a performance piece, creating this No Name Now, Bigger Than God character. It's quite a challenge going for something bigger than God. And that was 4 years I'd been working on it, and then I've got it on. I should send you the link if you like.
Lovely.
I got the same people that filmed the documentary, filmed this. It's not, anyhow, it's there. And basically I've got like a pig's head, and I got it all out, all this, so it's just the skin. It looks quite good actually. But I had a group in this, well, it was 2000s or something like that. These are hosts at the South Bank and Parks and the Recreational, so we did early 60s R&B, and really good stuff actually, very tight. And then this No Name Now collective, I said, well, let's do the opposite, just noise. So we just did noise with this. It's in Helen Tyler's back garden in Hanwell. She's got 3.5 acres, and she's got one of the only thatched roof cottages in London. She's a Quaker. It sort of goes back, but that's the next town over from Southall. Hanwell is next over, so that was sort of local. And this is where we had the group and myself, So I've got this idea of a 74-year-old naked lead singer with a group, which I want to get us on top of the Fox. You see, that would be a different. I think it's an original slant. You see, but that's my idea on that. Now, but the movie, you want to hear about that? Okay, is I went to LA in '72 with Miriam, and the idea was to earn as much money as we could and then go and live in Cambodia, because that's been my spiritual centre. Yeah. And you can't go there, it's the Khmer Rouge. I said, I don't care, I want to go there. And then Miriam left me after a year and a half, so that sort of faltered, and I stayed on for another 8.5 years. So didn't see that. And finally I got to Angkor Wat, about the year 2000, and inside, what it was the concretization of the great 3rd century Indian civilization. It was the first country in Southeast Asia, and the other ones, Laos and all that, spread out from there. But it's partly Funan, Chinese and Tibetan and Indian, so it's got lots of different strands to it. But the story is that I was at the British Museum. Anyhow, when I went to Paris by myself in '65 at Christmas, and had an ecstatic experience in front of a Cézanne painting, where it was an hallucination. It's the only time it rotated in front of me.
Wow.
It was apples and oranges. So I think he's got something. I'm interested in hallucinations. I've never taken drugs or anything, but it's just I'm interested in that. Miriam, my ex-wife, was LSD. That was her thing. She said she would have ended up as a legal secretary, so she swears by that. So that's all of that. But drawing, it was just a revelation. I saw this Cambodia stuff, J.I. Arverman, and there's this lovely, it's Indochina, so this serene inner peace and a smile, and it wasn't like, if you like, the Indian is over sensual, and the Chinese is a bit boring kind of thing. Although I think China is the greatest civilization the world's ever known. I get back to that. But second, Angkor was the biggest city in the world, over 1 million people in the 12th century. Now, in drawing the scribed line around the stylized hair on the Buddhist things, it started to come out in 3 dimensions, and I what's all this? So I saw the Michelangelo in the slave in the Louvre, and the Rodin's Age of Bronze. How do they make their round form? Basically, it's empathy. But I realised there was something conscious in the relationship of 2 and 3 dimensions on here, and so I sort of began to explore that. And it's a sequence of events. So they won't necessarily be chronological, but it'll give you the idea. On this, I'll jump ahead. On this MA in seminar group in modern English literature, my syllogistic logic was wanting, so he sent me through to the philosopher, logician Roger Galley, and I got the name wrong. I started studying symbolic logic, which made me even worse, because it's about existential affirmatives and all this kind of, but I liked it. Anyhow, he said, because I was interested in time, he said, you won't understand Newton, but St. Augustine, in his Confessions, in the second book, Under Imagination, describes the past, the memory, present as what you see, and the future as what you feel. So 1, 2 and 3 dimensions, literature, painting and sculpture. Now, I can't remember quite how, I was in Cork Street, and it's the Yugoslavian naive painting, actually, and in the catalogue there was a reference to Angkor, and it said that it's the tantric, the old Vedic scriptures, that sound atoms comprise form. So have a tantra, you go in a mantra, you can recreate form through sound. So I started exploring this, and I went back to the Cambodian stuff, and I started hearing what I was seeing rather than seeing what I see, and it started to move between dimensions. So there is a component of it of this in it. And then is another thing in the Winchester Mystery House in San Jose, California. Now that survived the 1906 earthquake. Everything else was razed to the ground, and it was like a spiritualist lady, and one room opens to the rest of the house, and it just confounds the spirits and all that kind of stuff. Anyhow, in the psychic bookshop downstairs, there was a book on Angkor, and it said rather than the Thai invasion saw the end of in the 12th century, the end of Angkor, actually they disappeared onto another plane of existence. Now, I've pursued this throughout my life at world conferences on Angkor. For example, there was Jane Fonda and Tom Hayden. So she went like this to me when I said about it, so she refused to give me her autograph. But I haven't found among academic things any reference to this. But when I finally got to Angkor, about that year on my own, I'd been earlier, I'd been 68, but I'd been to Bangkok and I was hoping to get down to Angkor, but the road was landmined, so I couldn't, and the American. So the killing fields and all of that was as a consequence of the American destabilization of the area. It's nothing to do with Pol Pot. Pol Pot was studying phenomenology at the Sorbonne and the French Communist Party of Stalin, so he applied some of those principles. We see the same thing happening now, actually. So it's rather, but Adam, my friend, he's calculated, he's voiced it. He said, well, it's a case where the ends justify the means, and it actually it seems to fit into that. It seems to be a way of not justifying it, but sort of explaining it in a way. And in the 60s there was America and there was Russia, and we thought they're both as stupid as each other. This would show off and fail. The American and the Russians would stay quiet and do it. It was ludicrous, and it's not dissimilar. You've got neoliberalism, and which has totally failed in democracy, and you've got totalitarianism, which is equally bad. So you've got the two things,
and neither of them are working.
Each other. Neither but some people are supporting. Now there was, contrary to the way it's been reported, there are neo-Nazi groups in the Ukraine. It's not been made up. They've got no press coverage because
it's been completely wiped off the internet. It's impossible.
And for 2 or 3 months before, we were more or less propagandized into thinking a certain way, a mindset that wasn't, sort of. So we were what was the thing? It's kind of. Anyhow, let's get back to the film. And this Uruguayan director, who did Adrift in Soho, is based on Colin Wilson, his autobiography. And last night in Chelsea, in Soho, it's a woman from our time, a young woman, goes as a fashion student back to Chelsea, Soho, and Bieber fashions and all that kind of stuff. And what happens to her, she almost hallucinates. Her mother did the same thing 30, 40 years earlier, and she actually embodies her mother. She becomes her mother and goes through what the mother went through. It's really good, actually. It comes in and goes out. It's jolly good. So it's beginning already to work with this idea of hallucinations, which is what I'm interested in. And I think Cézanne was the and he didn't know it, but because of the way he stared and would, before he made a mark, he'd think about it for half an hour or whatever. But now the film, with Adam, we got a 100-page text novel of it, of the thing, and roughly the storyline is that I go to Cambodia, and this was the film, at the time of the Khmer Rouge, and I tell them all about my ideas, and they say, how do you know all these things? Which is what the chief guide in Angkor said. I said, well, I was looking at the sculpture. He verified everything that was part of the thing. And anyhow, in Angkor, then they take a nail, and when they're going to bang it into the back of my head, on the first bang, I'm transported back in time to the Café Gerbois with Mesmer and Cézanne sitting outside. And I ask him this thing about hallucinations, you see, and I take back this information, dive through Malevich's Black Square en route, come out in the internet as a virus. And this is 5 or 6 years ago. And the idea is, this other character, and what's his name? The other guy's name. Adam, he's given me ownership of this character. So he said I can claim it. Good. So there's me, and there's this character. Now, for the film, he wants to have Brad Pitt as me and Leonardo DiCaprio as this Adam, this character. You see, so it's kind of quite. Well, he's I don't know what the word is. He's going big anyhow on it, really. But I mean, it's there. He needs to raise £30,000 to write the script, because unless in Hollywood, unless you have a tight script, no one's going to even look at it. So it's like in stagnation for a while. Anyhow, the thing is that as this character who I unite with, he becomes me. We fuse into the same body, and at that time, I'm just thinking, hold on. When he fuses into my body, he then departs and infects the whole world with the virus. And the deal is, because my mission is to rediscover modernism. Modernism started with Cézanne, and it, in my opinion, didn't survive the First World War, because if people are stupid enough to kill each other on a global level, nobody wants to think anymore. So there hasn't been any progressive art. No one's gone beyond what the russians did in 1917. The Pollock and Co. That was actually, they not only did they take from that, not Russian nihilism, Barrows and but they took from the black underpinning, and neither have been. They haven't said that's where they got it, but they do.
That's where it came from.
So they're not. It's not a reason. So this up that point. So and then it's kind of got weaker and weaker. And it's all about money, and it's almost diminished. It's always, so my is to rejuvenate that and take it back onto course. And
we do need something.
When he's infected the whole world, I go about taking down countries. Because Arab belief was one world, no more countries. And then he goes away, and it's just too much effort for people to redefine their countries. You see. Now, like again about this thing about nationalism, there's a re-emergence of this word, and there's no such thing. I mean, it's just made up basically. If you look at sort of revisionism, and you see nationalism in terms of revisionism as a development, not as nationalism as it was defined pre that, there might be some thing in it, but it's to me sickening, because the same arguments, which was the domino effect in Vietnam, because if this falls, it's all going to fall to communism. They're saying the same thing now. Where's he going to stop? The world's going to be taken. Well, jolly good, I'd say. But anyhow, apart from that, it's Holy Russia, you see, and Holy Russia is it has an identity, and so from a spiritual point of view, it's a compelling argument, not from any other point of view. And I think it's the same thing because I'm a pacifist, I don't believe in violence. So they say they see that as a contradiction, but it's not necessarily. I think ideas like the thing about I believe, you say anything to anybody, they're just words. The minute you touch somebody, that's a physical contact, and that's the shift. That's the paradigm shift. And so that's where violence begins, by touching people. So you say anything so that's my stance, and that's my how I define myself as a pacifist. Up to a certain point I had been totally consistent with that, but no, I pretty much wouldn't touch people.
There's an interesting idea around being passive and what that means, though, isn't there? It's you could say that like Gandhi was a pacifist, or
he wasn't. He
was manifesting a deep aggression and actually a very powerful.
Now, my brother is brother's a Gandhian. I'm not. I'm a pacifist. Gandhi said, if someone punches him on the nose, he'll punch them back. You see, I wouldn't.
No,
I'd just let them punch me, because
I've gone away.
If you don't fight, there's no fight basically. So at least they've got to surrender. For Christ's sake, or it doesn't matter about the reason. Just surrender. Stop it. Because it's getting out of hand. Before we all get blown up, it could. Escalate.
We're getting to that point again, aren't we?
And in '62 with Cuba, it was the Russians who backed down, So now it's the West's turn to back down. So they should back down, and they should encourage the Ukrainians to surrender. You see, but I never hear that Do you hear that talk on the media at all? Is
They've
there anyone
been
expressing that
they've been
point of
hyping it up for a long time, haven't they? They wanted this war to happen, and I don't know the reason for it.
view? No.
That no one knows.
No.
But they both sides seem to want this war,
Yeah.
and it's quite a strange place to be in.
Yeah.
Because we don't have a clue what's going on, because we're watching our media as well be
I
useless.
know. Yeah.
But it'd be quite nice to touch a little bit more on kind of your impression on technology and how that relates to being creative, and how possibly do you see a kind of way in which people have changed through your time, through through the 60s, 70s, 80s into the time we're in now? How do you see that technology would you say it's changed us as people, as societies?
I don't know. In the 60s, when I was at art school, Harry Soubron was going on about they've got these computers that can do. We were all excited, but it never materialised. You never made that contact. So then it was, and then all these people were getting jobs, and yawn time. Oh God, not more. And since then it's become the what it's all about, sort of thing. It wasn't then. We were pre that, and I find it in a way. I mean, those 3 years we were born, 1945, 46, 47, we were the original Generation X, you see, and what's the word? We have a take. We've got the best of both worlds, sort of thing. We see hedonism, that was the word I was looking for, going for happiness, hedonistic approach.
Please carry on. I've just got to.
Now, I've read lots of books about technology. I mean, just to see how people are enslaved to their mobile phone. I think the virtual reality, or whatever it is, it can't compare with the real thing, you see. I think that to actually go to a concert, I mean, no, it's not absolutely true. What happened, we've seen the sort of increasing personalisation from Greek times to religious times to the Renaissance, humanist times, to the genre times of Holland in the 17th century, to the beginning of political with David, and then Courbet disseminated. Basically, the narrative was the 19th century. Art was narrative until Maurice Denis said before, it's a painting or a nude or whatever. It's a flat surface covered in colours in a certain order. So up to that point, Courbet and Co. were questioning this. He painted lesbians on the bank, and so on. So if you think of the 19th century as the narrative, because that was the way of appreciating it, and then the 20th century is the mark, and if you think of the 21st century as the idea. So the point is, you see, I'm going to go off the subject again. Is that all right?
No, go ahead. Yeah.
Okay. What I've done is I've commissioned Nicky Brown, who I went to LA to find out about rhythm and blues, and the Windrush brought over this. Everyone said it's the church, which came in 1904. I think Church of God in Christ, out of Memphis, and then sort of spread up the west coast. And the Windrush generation brought it over in the late 40s, early 50s. And so it's Jamaican. There's a church in Tottenham that I've been going to for 30 years, Brother Bob. And blues and jazz are different soul beats from gospel music. This is the genesis. Anyhow, the big figure, and he had the shows for the BBC and stuff like that. So he's a significant figure, probably the dominant figure in that. What I had in mind for my show was to get a 600-piece gospel choir in the street outside. It was all possible because we had a 400-piece gospel choir in the 70s. It wasn't, I could have. Anyhow, it didn't happen. But he did something. Anyhow, the thing was that the first person, I did a big crucifixion in Cossack, 13 foot by 7 foot 6, and I wanted to put it in the Flower Festival show. They said the colours were too bright, so I couldn't show it. So sort of put it on hold. And then I was at Goldsmiths, actually. It was a conference on Schnittke, the Svolskaya, Golbaidovina, Schnittke. They were all Shostakovich's pupils who sort of... Anyhow, I met Ivan Moody, who's a Greek Orthodox priest, but he's also an avant-garde composer, and he loved my thing. It had iconic things about it, and so for 7 years I was negotiating. I had £2,000 to commission him. He said, I want it all set up before I go into it. So sort of negotiated with the Sinfonietta and so on. And was it then? Also, what I did, I got our choir, the workshop choir, backing Fontella Bass at the Barbican. I set that up. That was David Peaston and Fontella Bass. So that was, quite a significant event. But anyway, carrying on with this, Nicky, what happened with Ivan? My movie. I was sort of riding high on it. I was telling him what I actually wanted. The ending was. Did you see the documentary?
I've seen the documentary.
Yeah. So this thing at the end, that was just spontaneous. But what I wanted to do, and I'd got quite an influential black artist who was working with me, old, like 78, that sort of age, and he was going to get a cordon of panthers in Watts, where I would ejaculate into Mum's ashes and do a cross on my head. You see. So I told. Ivan this, and he wanted to have nothing to do with it.
It's a bit of a difficult
but anyhow,
one to...
Nicky has, he said, he's given me a get out of jail free, so I've given him the commission. But it was really, what I see it is the performance, which you'll see, you've got the link, not so much for the thing, for the crucifixion, but this is where it's moved on to. But he finds that edgy, and he doesn't like it really. He thinks I'm the greatest English artist of all time. He has the genius, so I've got really good, plaudits from him. Yeah. But not so much my performance art, because he finds that. But it is my main thing, the performance art. So it's a bit of a dichotomy there, really. Anyhow, what I was able then to do, because I've submitted now a package to Elaine, who's chief executive at the South Bank, to basically it's Nicky's stuff. And he scored it, so it's the Sinfonietta to play, and then in the middle for me to do the performances. Only we're doing this time psychedelia, and in here, Leamington, there was when I was sort of 15 or 14, I went to a place called the Blue Moon Club in Hayes, which is the next town over to Southall, and there was this group, mid-60s, Jimmy Powell and the Five Dimensions came on. And he's a little guy, and he sat on the piano. But it was the first extended break. It was the beginning of psychedelia, you see. And there was this tall guy who did Space Light, Rod Stewart. That was his first group. But the lead guitarist lives in Leamington, you see. So that's like Source, man. So what I'm trying to do is to get people from our group. It's just down to one now. To talk with him, so he can fill them in on where he's coming from. Then they'll disseminate that to get the psychedelic thing. But it's from, like Plato said, always go to the source. So that's what I'm doing. So I've got this idea with that. Yeah.
No,
sorry.
No, I love it. You
now come back to technology and ask me a few more probing questions.
You briefly mentioned this kind of. Would you? It's kind of a bit of a plain question, but would you say there is something innately important about our reality in itself, or can we begin to pass over into a world where we are completely engulfed within the realm of technology? We hear like Matrix and the idea of the metaverse and all of these new forms coming forward that allow us to completely almost like a metamorphosis into this new.
Two comments on that one is three comments on it actually. So you say reality. Now Ken
is that sort of subjective, I suppose?
Would prefer to use the word actuality.
Actuality.
Reality is anyhow. And Cecil Collins is another. He now I won't go on about him. He's another sort of influential thing. But the thing was that what am I saying? In a way, now I've got this wonderful quote, which I don't know. We've got this thing at the Spudworks, and I've got a project going next week. You see, which I won't be able to do because I've got this.
Oh no!
COVID. Yeah, I know it's terrible. I've got another one coming up on spirituality. What this was about was was Malevich's neologisms, and he would create suprematism, architectonics, but loads of words apparently he made up. Because the point is, certainly English vocabulary doesn't have words to describe spiritual experiences. Now, Silicon Valley has sequestered half the Western vocabulary for their own use. Now, the point about computer and cyberspace and all of that is it's a sort of poor man's spiritual, and it's very much like that. The only thing is, if I go into my spiritual realm, there are points at which it doesn't work, and if I take my natural spirituality, it works all the time because I can do it. But that's the limitation of this, is that it doesn't work.
It's almost removing the soul from the idea of spirituality.
Yeah. But it's working in not a dissimilar way, you see. But what's the thing? Gustave Moreau, who I liked. I think the whole thing, for me, and lots of other people do, but it was you had the Impressionists, who, and Cézanne said of Monet's just an eye, but my God, what an eye. Actually, he wrote to him more than anyone. But in between him and Cézanne, you had the symbolists. And whereas the Impressionists said everything is colour, so you can literally paint everything because it's all colour, and the symbolists said, well, you can think everything because it's all thought. Words. So what the Impressionists opened up with words, and what the symbolists opened up with thoughts. So in a sense, that brought the spiritual dimension into art. And then what Cézanne did was he's the greatest artist of all time in my books. He brought the two together and structured his compositions spiritually on a perceptual level. So I don't think he's really appreciated the significance of him. So that's the dichotomy between equally, if you take drugs, fine, but you have to buy drugs. If you run out of drugs, you have to get more and pay. Maybe you don't have money. So it's not a satisfactory. It's okay. I mean, I'm not, knocking it or anything, but it's limited. And in the same way that this whole concept of the internet is limited, and you don't really get the whole. It's fun, but not that much fun. I think it's oversold in a way that
it's not truly fulfilling. It's almost empty time wasted.
I think so.
And there's kind of a vacuous nature to the way in which we interact with it.
Well,
and I think I was trying to create this idea. It's like Nietzsche's existential nihilism, and it was a reaction to kind of the death at the beginning of secularism, and how we no longer had a deep, almost dogmatic ideological basis and foundation to our experience. It now feels like with the passing of the pandemic, that kind of function is a bit of an acceleration of the inevitability of the end of capitalism, in a sense.
Well, that's
and that kind of, maybe we are almost entering a kind of period of like a new existential nihilism, where we're trying to come to terms with the fact that the belief structure we've all been working under, which has been kind of capitalism for a long time, in the mainstream, is falling apart.
What Adam would describe himself as the transcendental nihilist. So that was quite a good way to put it. Now, oh shit, I forgot what I was wanted to say. I was picking up on something. Isn't that something that you go to things and then you forget what you wanted to say? What were you talking about? Just
how we kind of, it's time for a rebirth into a new ideological makeup as a society and a culture kind of thing, but because we're all kind of becoming aware of the fact that a lot of the systems we've been relying on are not working anymore.
And
that's why I think that's kind of part of the problem with technology in itself, because technology in itself was kind of it was kind of thought about as a new it was the opening of a new book of a realm of creation and freedom of information. But under the structure within the capitalists get their fingers in it, and it all just becomes a way of extracting your time and advertising to you constantly, as opposed to leaving people to enlighten themselves honestly, in a sense.
Well, Tim Berners-Lee, who his invention was the internet. I've been to a couple of talks by him, and he said basically it's an educational tool. The thing we've got to work out or be aware of is the companies are coming in to exploit. So now you go on the internet and you put something like the colour of a cat or something, and you get where you go to buy a cat. Different degree. It's all, and you can't get actually to just simple questions. It's all height. It's all sort of things. It's unless you know exactly the. So that's another thing that this depends on, very, very, very precise knowledge and past. no good. I don't have any memory. You see, short-term memory.
You're incredible. You know far more than more than I do.
Long-term memory, I do, but short-term memory. You say something, and I couldn't tell you what you said back. I just have no. I have none. It's completely gone. Yeah.
Yeah. No, it is an interesting time, and I'm and that's where this idea of like kind of the neo-Luddite comes in. It's just like, well, where the best way we need to sort of begin to reduce the inputs we have. We need to reduce the kind of amount of new technologies we've allowed ourselves and become reliant on, and even become addicted to, and then begin to reformulate a way in which to like a selectivized way in which we want to proceed.
Well, this is quite a good example of what I would put forward is. My generation, we were into static communication, which is like jet travel, international phone calls, and television. You are into digital. Now, what we have is total conviction and very little information. What you have is very, very little conviction and total information. So, I mean, the obvious thing is for us both to get together, which is what this is in a way, and finding that we can supplement each other's point of view and actually bring about the revolution, which has got to happen.
Well, the revolution must be looking backwards. There's all these brilliant ideas that come from our past, I think. Yeah. And there's like all of these different stories, whether they are revolutionary or whether they are, whether it be the Luddites or whether it be Epicurus or whether it be Marx or whether it be, but it's about creating something new that kind of takes all of that into account with technology and what we then to go on to proceed with.
I think my interest in Stalinism is what it can. It's only made up for Christ's sake. It's not real. You make it up. I'm not. I'm not going to go and stab someone or anything. I'm creative. I know, but it's nice to work with ideas in a meaningful way. And Adam's not 100 miles away from where I'm coming from, in as much as imaginarily. You could make up all sort of plots out of what's going on, but the censor the brain police or whatever you want to call them would come down if you venture onto the internet with any of that, would misinterpret that, you see. But there's a lot of potential. I mean, what you could see is this thing with Ukraine and something quite wonderful coming out as a consequence of it all.
In your documentary, I felt like one of the most moving moments for me was when you asked your mother, what do you think of death?
Yeah.
And I'd now like to pose that same question to you. What's your opinion of it? How do you?
No, I'm not the same as Mum. I don't believe in reincarnation. I'm an agnostic. I don't really have any. I haven't got a clue, to be honest with you. I haven't really thought about it. It's something. Mum said she's not scared of it, which is great. I don't think she was really. Anyhow, I made sure that she lived out. I think about that thing the way that again. I've been interested in voodoo, so I went to Port-au-Prince, to Haiti, some years ago, and met Max Beauvoir, who's the chief voodoo priest, and he's a biochemist, and his grandfather was the voodoo, and he said that Haiti is waiting for the rest of the world to slow down, to catch up, basically, is what we're saying. And then exactly a year afterwards, and it was when they had the earthquake in Haiti, I was in Benin, in Ouida, and the Fon, that's where voodoo comes from. The Nigerian synchronicity is in Brazil, but the Fon was in Haiti. That was the diaspora. Now, I had a goat sacrifice, then the thing comes out of you, I think. But I don't know what it is, but this accident with Mum happened some months after this. So there might be some subconscious link. I don't know how this works, but it's not conscious. And similarly, somebody said about my performance art, all these personas that I take on. Well, I do. This big nose character that I've had all the time, and self-portrait is sort of morphed into this no name now. It's superficial in a way, but actually, if I were to rationalise it, I couldn't, because it's very subtle. Actually, it's out of a whole, history of where art's. It's no longer the pencil holding the brush or the fingers holding the brush. It's from here to here.
Yeah.
And I got this theory that this walking art is taking it. I believe that walking art is what performance art was for me 50 years ago. And why? Because if you like, we're transporting our bodies. If you think of, as I began to say that, you think of it getting more and more personal. Whereas in the 50s and the 60s, we had actually pop records, so we didn't need to see the artist. We could play it in our living room, you see, and then it's got even more personalised. You can have a film studio in your living room. So it's going more and more personal, the whole thing, historically. I'm at that stage where which was in the 50s and 60s, which is why I talk about the spiritual and that. So it sort of found its way into sort of the spiritual, i.e. the internal one. Now Gustave Moreau said, it's one of my favourite quotes, what is external is ephemeral, what is internal is everything. My internal reality is much greater than my external reality, so that's where he nailed his things to the mast, from that point of view. So that's the point of view I'll take. I've been 100% spiritual all my life.
Yeah.
I saw when I was at school, went up to the Peggy Guggenheim at the Tate, the collection. It was about the fourth show I'd seen there, about 14 or 15. And there's this little Malevich suprematist thing, and it has such power that it just blew my mind. So I've always made him my number one. Nothing's sort of got anywhere near that, as far as I'm concerned. So yeah, but I mean, my art's kind of figurative. So, but it's just at art school we were taught to work to have no preconceived ideas, and B, to adopt a non-artistic approach to art, basically. So that's why I've been consistent over the years, without announcing. You do it and you don't tell anyone you do it.
Yeah.
So I've got this dichotomy now with Nicky, and this is what I've resolved. This is a resolution with this package that I've sent on to. It was difficult because I don't want to compromise my performance up, but I said to her, basically, if you find it a bit too iffy, this naked 74-year-old man, I would be prepared to display my the 13 by 7'6" crucifixion, so I could have that, shrouded and then take the thing off, but with the psychedelic music in both. But that's where Nicky thinks, it might be that's where he's composed the music to work against more my visuals than my performance art per se. But all I'm interested in is an actual connection between the sound and the visual, and that's creating a new sort of, I don't know where, but it's got to work. It's not about nothing. It's very much about something, sort of thing. So he's put a lot of work into that, and he's called it a classicization of the blues.
Well, thank you very much.
Right.
You've blown my mind.
Is it?
And you're really, really quite.